All right, in order to solve quadratics by completing the square, your quadratic expression needs to be in the form x squared plus bx plus c. So your a value is always going to be 1 in this type of solving. In order to complete the square, we are going to take half of b and square it. So written algebraically, I'm going to have b divided by 2 squared. So half of b squared. Now, to find the value that completes the square, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So if I look at example 1, I have x squared plus 4x plus a box plus our square. I'm going to look at my b value, which is 4. And we're going to do exactly what this bullet up here says. So I'm going to take half of b and square it. Well, half of 4 is 2, then 2 squared is 4. So in this case, my completing the square is 4. Alright, so if we do that exact same thing with example 2, my b value here is -5. So if I take half of b and square it, I could either use my calculator or I can just go ahead and square the top and square the bottom. But if I use my calculator, I'm going to go ahead and use this decimal. So -5 over 2 squared is 6.25. So that is the number that we use to complete the square. All right, if we look at example 3, I'm going to take -3/5 divided by 2 squared. So again, I'm going to use my calculator for this. So I'm going to have -3/5 divided by 2, and then square that. So that's 0.09 there. So example 4, we'll do that same thing. What's our b value? Our b value is 28. So if I take half of 28 and square it, well, half of 28 is 14. 14 squared is 196. And of course, if you don't know that, you can look in your calculator and get that value. So 196 is what goes in our square. What I want y'all to do now is, I'll have this Miss Levi pause the video, and I want y'all to do the first 6 on your assignment, which is like these first examples. And give you about 5 or so minutes to do that, and then we're going to move on the notes to solve by completing the square. Alright, in order to solve by completing the square, we're going to write some steps down. The first thing that you need to do is move your C term to the other side. So it needs to be on the opposite side of the rest of it. So for example 5, in order to move that, I'm going to add 52. So now I have x squared plus 7x. I'm going to leave a little space here, and you'll see why in just a minute. 0 plus 52 is 52. Alright, so this is where our previous examples will come into play. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square. And when we do that, so I'm going to figure out what goes here. When we do that, in order to keep our equation balanced, we have to add it to the other side as well. So this is what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. Oh, you can't see that. Let's scoot it over. Alright, sorry about that. Give you a few seconds to write it. Alright, so when we complete the square, that's going back up to like what we did up here. So I'm going to take half of 7 and square it. Well, when I take half of 7 and square it, I'm going to do that in my calculator. So half of 7 squared is 12.25. So that's the number I'm going to use in my box. Here, and I'll write it in a different color. Let's find a darker one. All right, so after we complete the square, we're going to rewrite this left-hand side as x plus b over 2 squared. So basically we're factoring it. The way this works is now that these are perfect squares, so I want to know what two numbers multiply to be 12.25 but add to be 7. Well, that's going to be our half of b thing. So x plus half of b is 3.5 squared. And then if I go ahead and add these together, I get 64.25. So this number always, always, always will be your half of b. And you can use your calculator to find out what that value is. All right, so now on to solving. To solve, to get rid of that squared here, we're going to take the square root of both sides, and the right side we're going to have plus or minus. So if I take the square root of this side, take the square root of that side, the square root on the left cancels the squared, so all we're left with is x plus 3.5. And then when I take the square root of 64.25, I'm going to put in my calculator, but whatever I get, I'm going to have plus or minus. Because, let's see what we get. 64.25, the square root of that is, we're going to round to the nearest hundredth, so that'll be 8.02. If I take 8.02 and square it, I should get that. If I take negative 8.02 and square it, I should also get that. That's why we have plus or minus. So this is going to be 8.02. All right, and then the last step is to solve for x. So to solve for x, we need to get rid of this 3.5. So to get rid of this 3.5, we need to subtract it because it's already being added. So this whole thing I could rewrite as negative 3.5 plus or minus 8.02. So this looks similar to when we did quadratic formula and we had the plus or minus. Whenever we have the plus or minus, you have to split it up into two different things. So I'm going to have the plus version, so negative 3.5 plus 8.02, and the minus version, negative 3.5 minus 8.02. So negative 3.5 plus 8.02, I get 4.52. Negative 3.5 minus 8.02, I get negative 11.52. So those are the two answers. Alright, so we're going to use those exact same steps to help us with example 6 and 7. So if I look at example 6, the way it is, I have x squared minus 19x equals negative 60. The very first step that we wrote was move c to the other side. Well, this one already happens to have c to the other side, so now I need to move on to the second step. So second step says complete the square. So what I'm going to do is rewrite it with enough room for my box. So remember, if we add something here, we also have to add something to the other side. So if I go ahead and look at, and remember to get this, we have to do negative b over 2 squared. So if I look at negative 19 divided by 2 squared, I get 90.25. So that's the value that goes in both of my squares, 90.25. All right, so we did number 2. Now step 3, we need to rewrite as it's factored. So I need to find two numbers that multiply 90.25 that adds negative 19. Well, this number 3 right here lists the shortcut for that, because that's the whole point of us completing the square, is that we are able to do this shortcut. So I'm going to rewrite it as x half of b is negative 9.5. So if I just look at this half of b part, so half of 19 is 9.5 squared equals, if I go ahead and combine these, I get 30.25. So now, step 4, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So again, this square root cancels the squared. So I have x minus 9.5. When I take the square root of 30.25, I get 5.5. So remember on number 4, that right side has to have the plus or minus, so I'm going to have plus or minus 5.5. And then solve for x is the very last step. So in order to solve for x, I need to get x by itself. So to do that, we need to add 9.5 to both sides. So x equals 9.5 plus or minus 5.5. Once you have it in this setup, you find the positive, find the negative. So I'm going to have 9.5 plus 5.5 and 9.5 minus 5.5. All right, if we add them together, 9.5 plus 5.5, that gives me 15. If I take 9.5 and subtract 5.5, that gives me 4. So there are my two solutions. All right, let's look at the last example. I have x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. So this case I have the c on the wrong side, so I need to move it. So I'm going to add 15 to both sides. So that gives me x squared minus 2x. I'm going to leave space, equals 15. All right, once we have that c moved over, we need to complete the square. So if I look at my b value is negative 2, so if I look at half of b and I square it, well, negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, negative 1 squared is positive 1. So I'm just going to be adding 1 to both sides. All right. Then we need to look at step 3, so I'm going to rewrite it as x plus b over 2 squared. So I'm going to have x, half of b is negative 1 squared equals 15 plus 1 is 16. Alright, once it's written like this, we need to solve for x, so we have to take the square root. Square root on the left cancels the squared, so we're left with x minus 1. The square root of 16 is 4, and don't forget the plus or minus part. And here's where it's easier to see. Positive 4 squared is 16, negative 4 squared is also 16. So that's why we need that plus or minus aspect. Alright, then I'm going to add 1. So x equals 1 plus or minus 4. Once you have it to this part, break it down with the plus and the minus. So 1 plus 4 is 5. 1 minus, oh, that should be a 4, not a 3. Sorry. 1 minus 4 is negative 3. So there are two answers. Alright, so the rest of your assignment, 7 through 12, is completing the square, solving by completing the square. So I want you to go as far as you can. Tomorrow you're going to have another assignment on this, but I will be there to answer questions that you might have. If you need to watch this video again, then you can find it on my YouTube channel, Miss Rothermel Math. It's the YouTube channel, and it should be the most recent video uploaded. So please watch it again tonight for homework if you need to. All right, good luck. See you tomorrow.